All right. Welcome to another episode of EAM Experts. Today with us is Jesús Sifonte. Jesús, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here again.
Yeah, we've spoken, last time we spoke in a podcast was about almost a year ago. So glad to have you back and ready to learn more about what we spoke about last time, which was reliability-centered maintenance in its baby steps, right? And I think today it's going to be a little deeper into that conversation, but also a little derail to what we're going to be speaking today about asset criticality analysis. So, first of all, let's start with, kind of a connection between RCM and the asset criticality analysis. What's the relation, and what are some of the techniques that you can use to associate them?
Well, yeah, asset criticality analysis, and it's also called asset criticality assessment, is one of the most fundamental tools in asset management. And in the RCMR model that we put together some years ago, it is part of the pre-work process. So before attempting to do RCM, to apply to equipment, to processes, let's try to understand what kind of criticality, how relevant are those assets to attain company goals. So asset criticality assessment, I would say that it is like a pre-step before applying something really serious to our assets portfolio. It's a way of understanding how critical, how relevant, how important are those assets that we possess to attain the company goals. So let's do it first, and let's do it as soon as possible. So it is recommended to do it like when assets are new, when assets aren't even installed, so we already understand its relevancy. So there is a direct connection between RCM and asset management. Being asset management is a step that should be carried out prior to even thinking who's going to get RCM or any other technique.
Yeah, and I remember last time we spoke, it was, do it as soon as possible. That's probably, not the case for many older plants, but do it as soon as possible, right? If you get to it late, later is better than never. And you're probably, you're going to benefit even when you're late in the game to that, right? So what's the asset criticality analysis or assessment? What is that?
Okay, so the purpose of it is really to understand how can asset deliver, as expected. So to make sure that assets deliver as expected, and it is a way of understanding asset criticality, and it relates the consequence of assets failures to also with the probability of those failures to occur. And in certain ways, a semi-quantitative approach in which each asset will have a kind of risk priority number. And this has been done, for a while already. And there are methodologies to do that and to get aligned with, for example, CMMS RPN systems. So it is basically a tool, a really important one, that lets us understand how critical are assets for attaining the company goals. And it is something that is more let's say, relevant that we might think. So it really organizes the whole strategy, because we have scarce resources. So we don't have infinite, mechanics, infinite spare parts. We don't have
Or
an
money.
infinite budget. So we have a limited resources, and asset criticality assessment is a way of prioritizing, letting us know how to prioritize our budget, our capital projects, our expenditures in a way that we are complying, we are attaining the company goals. And there is also some concepts that we need to clarify, Ernesto, when we speak about risks, when we speak about criticality. What is risk? There are many people doing risk analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And do we even understand what risk is? So, and risk is defined as uncertainty to attain goals. That is risk. It is the effects that those uncertainties have on attaining company goals. So if we say that we do risk assessment, we have to understand really what are the goals of the company, and we have to connect our assets to those goals. So assets could be very critical today and not that critical tomorrow. So depending on the company's objectives, the company's ideas, the company's objectives moving forward. So asset criticality is something dynamic. So we need to understand first the risks which are associated with the company goals. Then we do the asset criticality assessment.
So this is I think risk assessment specifically is a concept that has been applied, to many different aspects, and I think it applies to many different departments or many different environments in a company, right? For example, one of the earliest or previous chapters that we had was on cybersecurity, and they were talking about something similar, risk assessment. Make sure you know, or at least are prepared to, whenever something happens, what will happen or what will be the reaction from the team. What would you say is, or how far from cybersecurity is what you're talking about, or what can be some of the similarities there? Because it sounds very similar, but I'm sure it's very focused to what RCM is, and obviously
it's the risk. If we want to quantify risk, so we have to take into consideration the consequence of a failure, of a total failure, and the probability of such failure. Mm-hmm. So in that term, so it is basically the same thing. So you are assessing possible, probable failure events, and also you are assessing the consequence of such failure events to the company. So here, when we speak about assets, physical assets, what we do is that we, if the assets are already in service, so we have some history, failure history, so we can understand the probability of failures based on that history, and we can measure the impact of those failures, downtimes. We may have gotten some accidents from those failures. Maybe we have also experienced some environmental losses or environmental situations that can expose the company. So somehow we need to put that into a number, right? So we have to represent the asset as critical, and so there are many similarities. So the concept is basically the same. Here we are talking to physical assets specifically, and we are thinking, we need to have a multidisciplinary team of people from operations, people from a design perspective, from maintenance, so we from reliability, so we can somehow quantify that criticality level.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about purpose, right? We know what we should be doing, you know, or at least assess to be prepared. Is that the only purpose for the asset criticality, or is there more?
Okay, the asset criticality assessment can be done in a couple of stages of the asset life cycle. So the sooner the better, as we have said before. But the main purpose of it is to prioritize everything, is to prioritize strategy, for example. So if you think about a very asset intensive company, organization, like the oil and gas industry, etc., like the cement industry, like the automotive industry, like the pharmaceutical industry, so where you depend on many assets to attain your goals. What asset criticality assessment does is it lets you organize, classify those assets per criticality, and at the same time, you will be able to determine what kind of instruments you're going to use, for example, to determine the maintenance approach for them. And I like what is the International Society of Pharmaceutical Engineers, they do. They have a reliability manual that I like a lot. So they say, okay, if I have assets to manufacture my product, I will evaluate them, and those assets ranking 4 and 5, you know, they have is 1 to 5 level of criticality. So let's say assets with 4 and 5 criticality, so those are the critical and very critical assets, we will apply RCM to them, and we will determine the maintenance strategy and any redesigns and changes that we may want to have on them by doing RCM. If you have like assets in the range of 2 and 3, or maybe 3, so for those assets, you will do an FMEA, or you will do another type of strategy that is not as complex, as time consuming as RCM. And for the low criticality asset, you may have only a checklist to do for your maintenance plan. So you may have assets that are similar, you know, physically, but they are not equally important or relevant. So they can be classified, and then the effort that you put on them is somehow optimized by this approach. So by the same token, let's say that you, and asset criticality is something dynamic, Ernesto. It could change. Assets could be very critical today, and tomorrow could be less critical, and the opposite is also true.
So let me put an example here and see if I'm close to what you're trying to put in perspective. So for example, I have 2 machines, A and B are exactly the same. One is running day by day, and then the other one's spare, right? So in this case, probably you have a high criticality asset A, but then you have a low criticality asset B, but then you switch it over, right? You're using that spare, and then give asset A a rest. So now the criticality switches. Is that where you're?
Yeah, that's a good example. And also, let's say that the company now has other plants, like manufacturing plants, and out of a sudden, asset B is not anymore a backup. It is a principal one, and it is running the most productive, the most the principal product of the company. So out of a sudden, it changed criticality, and so the operational context changed a lot, and you need to, you know, give it a higher priority, higher criticality, and according to that, so pay attention to the maintenance.
So would you say it's related to for example, the yield of the asset in terms of what the the products that it works with.
That's one of the aspects that we evaluate. So generally speaking, you need to identify. Asset criticality entails identifying the consequence of failures and the probability of failures. So for doing so, you have to identify companies, it is called, what are the drivers? You need to identify company drivers. And you say, okay, the drivers of the business drivers are productivity, quality, etc. Right? Those are my business drivers. So you need to agree on those drivers with and look for like variables, like you need to look for something that represents those values. For example, those drivers. So you will say, okay, to me, productivity is a driver. So I will use it as a as one of the values that I will be monitoring, for example. Okay. And you will say, okay, how now I have the consequence of the failures represented by productivity, represented by let's say accidents, if I have some sort of accidents. And so if I have some environmental challenges, those will be drivers that will be there representing the consequence of the failures. And somehow we need to put together a matrix with some ranges of values that we use there. And now we switch to the equipment or asset drivers. And for asset drivers, we will use, it is pretty common to use MTBF, for example, or we can use the opposite, the one over the MTBF, which is the failure rate. So the remnant life we can use, etc. So we need to have a business driver, and we need to have an asset driver. And asset drivers are most likely it could be represented by MTBFs or frequencies of failure. So once we determine how to do that, we apply it to our asset portfolio, and we just classify them. So some companies just have an ABC type of classification. Others have a 1 through 5 classification, and all of them are good. The thing is that you have to continue evaluating asset criticality. This is something dynamic. You don't do it today and you forget it until the next 20 years. So it's something that every other year you should be like evaluating, and that will drive your maintenance approach, your spare parts acquisition approach, also your planning. If you have work to do and you have an asset that is label type A, and there's a couple of type C assets, so of course you will go to the A assets. That will be the ones that you will prioritize while doing your work.
Can we quickly describe what the ABC concept is? I don't need to derail the conversation to that, but just since we were talking about that.
Okay, A is a very critical asset. B is medium criticality. C is low criticality, generally speaking. Okay. Yeah. So you can go all the way from 1, which is low criticality, 2, which is very low criticality, medium criticality, high criticality, and very high criticality. That's the 1 to 5, right? Classification. So the idea is just having 3 is very good. Just high, medium, and low criticality assets. Yes. That's pretty good. That's pretty enough, and that will give you a lot of insights on what to do planning wise.
So if we were, to break it down in percentages of assets that you have in a company, would you say 20, 30 for level A, and then lower would be, somewhere between the 50%, and then C would be another 20, 30.
Definitely the very critical assets like type A assets may be in the range of 20, 15, 20, 22% of all of your assets. That's generally speaking.
Yeah.
You have to apply an analysis to your assets. And the majority of the assets will be like medium criticality, and then you have a couple of low criticality assets. That's like the norm. But again, you have to do an analysis. You might end up having more critical assets than you might think.
Yep. Okay, so I think you covered a little bit of the steps, and I think I can sum it up for you and see if we missed something. So from what I gathered, you have, the main steps would be identify, obviously, those assets, rank them in certain criticality, but the criticality has to be based on certain parameters that you establish as a company of what matters to you, right? Either productivity, revenue, or safety, for example. That could be a big pillar in many companies. And then from there, you can rank those assets and say, okay, so this is a 5, this is a 1, or this is an A, and this is a B or C. Is that close to what you mentioned?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. That's a very good summary. So first, what you have to be aware of is about the company goals. Everything starts with the company goals, like the vision of the company, the mission of the company, the direction of the company. Where are we going in the next 5 years? So based on that, you then have the scenario for your background. You have the company background, and you can do your asset analysis. Then you ask yourself, okay, you have an asset portfolio, so you have many assets. Let's see how these assets, if they fail, those objectives that I have are affected. How can they affect objectives? And you know that how can you affect the objectives? Okay, depending on how relevant the asset is, for example, for productivity. If you have just one machine producing and that machine fails, so you have zero productivity. So that asset is really relevant. And together with that, the asset condition. So if the asset is new, the asset, is in good shape, it is running well, and it has no failures, it's not failing, so then the asset will be less critical than having in an oldie some asset that is having some problems already and it is more prone for failing. So that will increase your asset criticality. So those two go together. But let's say everything starts from the company objectives, then you have to put together a multidisciplinary team. So I will say like upper management, at the upper management level, you have to decide, you have to agree on a matrix, on a criticality matrix. So there you decide which are going to be the business drivers, which are going to be the asset drivers. So you will pick a couple of variables, you will pick a couple of parameters, so you can put together your asset criticality matrix. Once that is defined, then you go down to your, operation areas. So you go down to your operational managers, to your maintenance managers, and you put together teams to rank your assets accordingly. But the criteria has to be institutionalized. So it has to be part of the institution. It has to be part of the goals of the company. It has to be something that is put together, taking into consideration the company direction where we are going.
It's probably related to what the company wants to improve that year, right? Would they say they want to increase revenue by X amount? Would they reduce costs? Do they want to reduce their footprint on the environment? And those would dictate the the asset criticality assessment. Now, let me ask you on the other side, what not to do. What are some of the mistakes that you've seen happen day in, day out?
So the most common one is when it is done at the operational level, just by maintenance people alone, without taking into consideration the company goals, the company direction, the values of the company. So it is just a very lonely perspective. So maintenance alone is doing it. Really now, there is a lot of intelligence, there is a collective intelligence that we are missing, from people of other departments, and we are missing basically we're missing the mission of the company when we do that. And that's a pretty common mistake, doing it alone, doing it only with maintenance people. The second one is not revising it. So if you do it once, let's say that you do it very well, but asset criticality is dynamic. It might change with time. Let's say that nothing changes. So you have the same production volumes for the next 15 years. Nothing changes. There is one thing that we're missing that is changing, and that's aging of the assets. Assets are aging, and as assets age, they have different types of failures with time. So we don't worry too much about corrosion, about mechanical looseness when assets are new, but past like 10, 15 years, you start worrying about that, and you will do asset failures. So your MTBFs are going to increment. So we have to take that into consideration, and assets become more critical, and they age. If everything is constant, but assets still ages, the assets age, and we need to take that into consideration. Those are like the most common mistakes. There is another one, and that is only taking into consideration the consequence of the failure and not the probability of failures, because we are treating all assets as equal, even if they are the same kind. So we're treating them as equal. So we may have assets in poor condition together with assets, new assets. So we have to make a difference. We have to classify them differently. So these three are kind of the.
So you would say communication, not being alone on this process. You need to involve
a multidisciplinary approach is instrumental here.
Yeah, and then you would say you need to gauge what the company values are, and also understand that this is a dynamic environment, and it's not a one-time deal. You have to keep developing the project. So I think I missed one, right? The last one.
Oh, okay, the last one is just ruling out the probability of failure, just considering
you're treating them the same. So you need to gauge which ones are new, which ones are fully engaged in those pillars that you define, and then you have to get to the point where you do a matrix and not a linear equation. Awesome. All right. I see you have a book there. Is that something you want to share?
Okay. Yeah. When I do asset criticality analysis, I use, this is the resource I use. It's risk-based asset criticality assessment.
Okay.
By my dear friend Susan Griman, and I had the privilege to write here something. So to review it when it was initially done. So one of the forewords I had the privilege to do, and this is what we adopted in our organization, what we follow, what we teach. There are other approaches too, but this is very, very attached, very in line with asset management because the author of the book is an asset management expert and also risk management expert. So yeah, this is what I use for doing our asset criticality assessment. And together with the RCMR, when we do RCMR, previously we want to do some pre-work and classify assets.
All right. So Jesus, I want to thank you for your time today. Sadly, we should cut it here, but we can definitely meet again, and I'm sure there's a lot of subjects that we're leaving out. So I want to thank you again for joining us on a second run at RCM and Asset Criticality Analysis and Assessment. Where can people find you? You know, websites, social media.
Yeah, I work with conscious reliability. You can find me consciousreliability.com. So we do RCM and reliability classes there and projects. I'm also part of PDM Tech with offices in Puerto Rico and here in Toronto, Canada. So at pdmtechusa.com, you will find information about our company and you will find schedules and classes, etc. So thank you for having me, Ernesto. It's a great pleasure to be back with you guys.
All right, thank you very much. To all our listeners, we do have many different platforms that we share this recording afterwards. That would be YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, and many others. So feel free to join us, subscribe, like the videos and the content, and add us in LinkedIn. You can follow us through the website on visualk.com. So there's many ways you can reach out. Feel free to connect with us and have a chat. And thank you very much for this exciting episode. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.